welcome to the Love, Listen, Talk, Repeat podcast. I'm Wendy Capewell, your relationship specialist, and this podcast is all about things relating and affecting relationships. I'll be interviewing guests who are experts in their profession, learning more about what they do and how they help others. In some episodes, I'll be sharing some insights and tips of my own. So settle back and enjoy. Hi, it's Wendy, and today I'm going to be talking to Rick Sharpe, who describes himself as a man on a mission to raise awareness about emotional struggle in men, to help others suffering emotionally. So I'm going to hand you over to Rick and ask him to introduce himself and tell us more about him.
Well, thank you, Andy. Thanks for having me on the show. And obviously, people know my name, and it's an interesting introduction in the sense that I'm just kind of like a guy next door type thing that went through a huge emotional experience about 3 years ago, where I was in a 4-year relationship, was hugely emotionally invested, and then that came to an end, which really made me question a lot of what happened in my life, my history, and why I was kind of in that situation again. And that led me to actually, well, it started off as journaling, and it never really was supposed to be a book, but that's where we went to, and the book is out there. And one of the interesting things about it was that interested the publishers was the fact that there's lots of stuff out there from women, because women are very expressive and they're, I think, more in touch with their emotions than men are. And in this particular book, it was a lot about my emotions, my journey, and it was heartbreak, it was depression, it was described very vividly in the moment, and that, I think, they felt could resonate with a lot of men out there, and women and men. Women, because, again, I think we're mysteries to each other, men being mysteries to women, and vice versa. I think it was, what's his name, Gray, that wrote that book, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. But I think God pulled off the cruel joke of putting us all on the same planet. So, and we are a mystery to each other. And I think, for that reason, that was a hugely vulnerable thing for me to do. Vulnerability being something my whole male generation, I think, ran from. But at the same time, if there were other people out there struggling in the same manner, I think if they resonated, it doesn't really tell you what to do. It just resonates. If they resonated with that kind of story, there were some revelations at the end, that some takeaways that could possibly help other people. So that's how I got to that point in my life, and then since then, recognizing that time is very finite, especially when you're in your later years, and it's very precious. So I took that opportunity in that path of trying to figure out what I was about and who I needed to be in kind of a self-discovery and personal growth aspect of my life, to really put myself on the right track. And I went through some research, education, and trying to really put all that together. And I think I've come to a really, really good place in my life, and for the first time, I would say, and I think that's worth sharing for everybody, because there's so many people out there that go through a lot of these same things, but really don't have a voice, if that makes sense.
Right. So you didn't feel you had a voice?
Well, no. I mean, in the sense that you as a man of my generation, I mean, we repressed everything. We were, men are meant to be the provider, the protector, the mentor, the white knight, and the role model for partner, for family, for these types of things for children. And any break in any one of those, any cracks, and we didn't want to, speaking from my own personal experience, I didn't want to feel like a failure, and there's shame written all over that. So you hide that, and we get so good at hiding it that it becomes when people actually do find out where you are emotionally, and you come out of that, they're very, very surprised because we're so good at hiding it.
Yeah. So you felt that you had this huge kind of burden that you had to be a certain way, a provider, the white knight, all of those things.
Oh, absolutely. And that's kind of stereotypical. Like, I mean, society
Mm.
does that to us. And, you grew up in an age where, big boys don't cry, and, you play varsity hockey. I spent many years being an air traffic controller, which is an alpha male environment. And when you were working, I think they used to say to you, okay, whatever you have going on outside from your personal perspective, leave it at the door and come in and do your job, which is emotionally impossible.
Mm.
So as you're working and you have all this other stress descending on you from a professional perspective, all that stuff that's going on in your life that you were told to park outside that door, you suppress it and you get really good at doing it. So it was a lifelong way of basically, that was the functioning that I went through for my entire life.
Mm. And that, like I say, that's heavy to carry around.
Well, it is. You're right, and many people do it, men and women. I mean, more so men, because we're not that emotional. We're not that emotional as far as beings go, and we, especially around other men, we don't want to seem like we're kind of the softer version of us, and we kind of in the locker rooms and sports and whatnot, we stand up and stand tall against the other alpha male, so to speak. But just to illustrate that a little bit, we were out for dinner one night, and a friend of mine had invited one of her friends along, and he was a pilot, and we're having a conversation, and the book came up actually, and they said, well, what he says, like, well, what's your book about? And I kind of beat around the bush on this. Like, I felt a little bit ashamed by saying, well, it's a book that I wrote about, myself and a partner breaking up, and I went into this depression, and I really, really struggled emotionally. And I kind of beat around the bush for about 2 or 3 minutes. And then finally I gave up, and I said, look, this is what it's about. It's about my personal and emotional journey after I had a breakup with somebody I was very, very much in love with. And I just kind of put it all out there. And he looked at me and he goes, hey, yeah, I can relate to that, and then we started talking. So, one of the big takeaways in the book is, like, people need to talk about these things. And I think even with strangers, once you do that in from a position of authenticity, you grab their attention, and then they open up. And sometimes, like in that particular situation, you end up having this wholehearted conversation with somebody you've never met before. And that was really, really interesting.
What was that like for you when you realized that this guy was also sharing his stuff? What did it?
Well, it was empowering, and it made me realize that writing the book was still the right thing, because when I did write it, and they called me up and they said, we're putting it out there, we're publishing it, I was scared crapless, because I still had that whole vulnerability thing, thinking that, okay, some of my friends in my closer, my inner circle, they knew what I went through, but my God, I'm putting that out for the whole world, and that was scary. So even with this stranger, it was kind of like a litmus test, and when he responded the way he did, and most people since have done that in that way, it encourages you to talk about it even more, and that releases even more from the past. And it was really empowering, because each time you tell your story to a different person, you kind of verbalize it in a different way. And if you listen to yourself speak, you can actually take a little bit more away from it, and it becomes unstuck more and more and more. So yeah, it was empowering, and it was a relief, even in a sense, because that was one of the first times I had to kind of explain that to a guy, and one I didn't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not to be shamed or feel that you're the only one. I should imagine that was quite a relief. That was part of that's my imagine. That's my fantasy anyway.
For sure, because even in my voice there was shame as I was trying to beat around the bush and And he was sitting there kind of thinking, basically, well, get it out there, out with it, sort of thing. And that is always a fear, absolutely. And when you have, your peers around, or when you have fellow colleagues that work in like I said, an alpha male environment, of which aviation air traffic control is. When you open up with that kind of authenticity, it is a relief, because I don't think I ran into anybody that actually went the other way and said, oh, basically button up. Like, I mean, what are you crying about, sort of thing. So yeah, it's amazing how empathic so many people can be. And that comes from the fact that we don't know what their stories are. And sometimes you just have to ask. And when people do, I've been very, very surprised how people have opened up and told their own stories. And all of a sudden you have this common ground, and you have this realization more and more that you're not alone. None of us are alone. So we have this, 10 or 12 different emotions that we deal with as a human being. And there's 7 billion people on the planet. So there's just no way that you're alone. I mean, there's millions of people going through what you're going through, even though at the time, when you're in those types of relationships and they're breaking up, you do feel like you're very alone, and you kind of hide away in your room and wallow in it sometimes. I mean, that's what I did.
Yeah. So what were the kind of main struggles that you faced, after the breakup?
Well, there was a number of them, actually, but the ones that stood out was, number one, I really didn't know. I mean, this was let me go back a step, because it was a mutual agreement. I mean, there's a huge age difference, and obviously, in that in itself, there are different expectations from life. So, we made that decision together, and I knew that as soon as she drove out down the road, I just questioned everything I did and everything I said, and I thought, this is wrong. That this is not right. So it seemed like my whole world came crashing down on me emotionally, and then I think the next thing that happened was, like, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, and it was just driving me crazy. And I just started journaling and started getting it out on paper, because that's the only way that I could find any rest, just to get it out of my system. So I would sit down, I would write, and I would recommend that for anybody. And I would just get up and leave it and not even know what I wrote. Just the fact that I was just kind of getting that out of my system. But I wallowed. I did. I went into this really dark depression, and I felt that I deserved it almost, and I took all the blame for that relationship working out, which was wrong. I mean, you can only accept 50% responsibility for any relationship. So that was a huge struggle. And I got to the point where I wasn't going out. I was avoiding people. I was in a job where I was working out of my apartment, so I had no office to go to, no social interaction, and I was really, really struggling. So there was a moment of reckoning when I realized that I needed to do something.
Yeah, that's really a difficult place to be, isn't it? That sense of just helplessness, I guess, loneliness, isolation. That's what I'm picking up on. Yeah.
All of that. And I remember sitting in the dark in the evening, in the dark, two things actually, in the evening, in the dark, staring at a glass of whiskey and going there knowingly, and knowing that the next day this wasn't going to make me any better. But I had this extreme pain, and the pain centers in the brain, they don't know the difference between emotional and physical pain. I mean, it's all the same. So I was literally just going there willingly, and I knew it. And then you'd wake up in the morning and stare at the alarm clock, and again, no place to go. So you would just I would watch the numbers ticking over on the alarm clock, and then I would turn my head and stare at the ceiling and doze off. And then all of a sudden the sun would go down again, and then there was no reason to get out of bed. So And there was be like 2 or 3 days would pass like that. And thankfully, you get to a point where you really, really have to give your head a shake and get a grip on your life, because that was really taking hold of me way, way too much.
Yeah. And I think you talk about when we break from a relationship, that when we feel that heartbroken, and it really is a physical pain, isn't it? It's not just emotional, it's almost, there's a pain in our chest when we have that heartbreak. I think it really does. It's, people talk about it, but it hurts. It's physical.
It is, and it's just a dull, throbbing ache right in the middle of your chest. It was for me anyway, and it just doesn't go away. And your mind is an interesting thing, because it will crucify you if you let it. And I just kept living in the past and asking all those questions: why, why me? And that just accentuates that pain. It just does not go away. And over a period of time, it becomes very physically debilitating, because it does affect your health.
Yeah, exactly. So what was that point? At some point you were in that really dark, deep place. What made the difference? What changed? What steps did you take?
Well, first of all, when I look back on it, I realized I went through a 4-step process when I actually sat back a couple of years later and looked back on it, and that I could actually share with somebody else. And I went through, I call it my aura. I had to change my aura, and people that are deeply spiritual can actually see auras, and some are positive, lots of them are negative. And so using the letters in the word aura, I had to acknowledge where I was. And that day came, and I said, Rick, you're not well. This is not good for you. Your health is failing. And I had to acknowledge the fact that I was in a really deep and dark place. So once I realized that, then I got really curious, because I needed to understand how I got there and why I was ending up in the same place, late in my life, and why I was getting that same result. It was almost like, it's interesting. It's almost like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. And it was just ludicrous to me. So that journey of understanding really took me back into my past. And that wasn't an easy thing to do. And part of the book was as a result of that, because sometimes you have events in your life, if you look at them singularly, they really don't mean much. But if you start piecing some events together, then they start to make sense. And that's a painful journey, because people don't like pain. Like, they want to stay away from it. Yeah. You can fight with it, you can argue with it, but you don't want to go there. So it was a really difficult thing to do, and I really had to sort of look at myself in the mirror and say, dude, like, you're this because of this, and this. And some of it is with family, and some of it with past relationships, and just stuff that happened in my past. And you piece it all together, and I thought, okay, now I'm starting to get this. So once I did that, then I had to really take responsibility, because a lot of people that go through the relationship breakups, and I did this, and I tried to blame her. It's her fault. Yeah. And that wasn't fair, number one. But I really had to take responsibility for my part in it. I had to take responsibility for what I let the breakup do to me, because she didn't do that either. And she moved on with her life, and that really pissed me off even more. So I hated her more. I tried to hate her, and I couldn't. In the end, I couldn't. So taking responsibility and not doing the blame culture thing. And then lastly, I said, okay, I got that far, and now I needed to, as everybody does need to, you needed to take some sort of action. So, that action was doing some research. I came across Brene Brown. She's done a lot of research on shame and vulnerability. And when I read all 3 of her books, I went away to Bali for 3 weeks to finish my book, and I didn't get anywhere with it because I got sidetracked on vulnerability. And I realized that I was kind of the poster boy for vulnerability avoidance. So that kind of rocked my boat a bit. But that put me on a different journey, in the sense that, okay, I need to make myself better. I need to improve my life and my emotional well-being. And that took me to doing educating myself as a life coach and emotional intelligence and mindfulness. Most importantly for me was I think my savior. So the end result of all of that was basically 2.5 years later, I actually got to a place, I think for the first time in my life, where I really got to a point where I loved myself as a person and I liked who I was. And that whole thing about self-love. And we talked earlier, touched on about how men struggle with, vulnerability and emotion and all that kind of stuff. And if you sit down with a man, you say, okay, one of the first things you have to do in order to really pull your life together is find some sort of self-love. And they choke on that. It's like, dude, like how, I don't get you. I don't know how to do that, and that can, and for most men that struggle with that whole kind of, and it's a process. You can actually suggest, like, well, self-love can actually start with, taking care of yourself physically and nutrition-wise and all that kind of stuff. That is a form of self-love, and it's a start in the right direction. But the whole emotional self-love men really struggle with in the beginning, but it is a process.
Definitely. And I'd like to take you just back a little way when you were saying you were in that dark place, because you talked about the fact, what I would say that you were going through the grief process. When that relationship broke up, you were and there are 5 stages or 7 stages depending on your view, but you were grieving. But the point is that she was still around. And when somebody dies, it's almost easier in a way because they haven't moved on. Like you said, she got on with her life. And that's what I noticed, where you were grieving. And one of the, deep, dark place depression's one of them. There are, for people to understand those 5 stages, it's quite interesting to acknowledge those and find out what they are. Because, we go in that place where, and then the blame, that's another very common one. It's her fault. It's nothing I did. Well, it's all their fault. And then actually to take that acknowledgement, what part did I play in that? That's a really, really tough one, isn't it?
That's a hard look in the mirror. You're absolutely right. And it's because you've got to really face up to and acknowledge and take ownership of your shortcomings, and that's a really tough thing for people to do. And the interesting thing about that relationship is it was one of those, and this is the difficult part about it. Lots of relationships end because somebody did something or the other person said, there's an event that actually is the catalyst towards the end of this relationship. We just kind of drifted apart, which was really difficult to swallow because you can't pinpoint it on any particular event. And it's really hard to sort of wade through that to find some sort of internal justification that why that relationship ended, and sometimes that's just life. It's just a journey. And I can say that now, but back then I wasn't entertaining any of that. Absolutely not. It was her fault, and I wasn't to blame. But the problem with that is that you take that attitude forward to another relationship, and without taking ownership of that, the same thing's going to happen because it's going to be the other person's fault, and we don't learn from that. And that's what people get into these cyclical kind of events in their life. And unfortunately some people do learn, lots of people don't, and then they wonder why their quote unquote lot in life always remains the same.
And it's quite useful, isn't it, to feel the innocent party. It was all their fault. You're going to get all the sympathy from your friends. You're going to get the attention, you poor thing. And you can say the victim and just feel, I'm so kind of justified in my feelings. And then, you get stuck in that situation. But then when it keeps happening with relationship after relationship, you've got to at some point say to yourself, hang on a minute, I can't keep picking the wrong person.
What is the one common denominator of all these relationships? And again, that's a hard thing in the mirror to face up to. It's like, I am the common denominator. I am the common thread through all of these. So, you playing the victim is a choice. So, that victim card only goes so far, and you want to carry that around all your life. That's a tragedy, really.
Yeah, and some people do, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think, and I said this somewhere, was like, I think you can lie to all your friends and you can lie to your family, but I think the biggest travesty in life is that you lie to yourself. So I think that's the biggest thing that you shouldn't do, because that's the point of no return as far as I'm concerned.
Definitely. So what are the learning points that you took with you, that you have taken with you, brought forward?
I think one of the biggest things that I learned was I got into, again, like mindfulness. Mindfulness is not just about meditation. And it's interesting that meditation is only one letter difference in that, and they're so different. But at the same time, learning to live in the moment, and that's where mindfulness comes. Where again, you walk, and she was all over my mind for like a couple of years, but in the later stages of that, moving on, she was, something would happen, I would see something, and your brain triggers without you even realizing it. It just triggers. And all of a sudden, if you have the self-awareness to know where your mind is taking you, you can actually pull it back into the present. And once you do that, and that could be walking down the street, noticing other people, staying in the present, noticing nature around you, which is a great escape, nature. But as soon as you do that, that past tense focus disappears. So that was one of the biggest things for me. And I think there's 2 or 3 other things as well. One of the things was, I think when we're born, we're given these 2 beautiful gifts, and that is a mind and a body. And I think it's incumbent on people who want to live a full life to take care of both. I think if you take care of one and not the other, I don't think you're there. I think one feeds the other. So my dad used to tell me, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. And you become, again, later in life, I've become sort of thirsty for knowledge, and that really keeps my mind really, really active. We just talked about it. I think you need to be accountable to yourself, and don't blame others. Be kind to other people. I think that's absolutely huge, especially when you're going through periods of depression. When you're kind to somebody else, it's almost a gift to yourself, because although you're doing nice, it's nice to see the look on somebody's face when you do random kindness, but it actually neurologically does something really good for you. So, that was one of the other things. I think the other, just be really grateful. I find that I struggle. I've been in the Middle East for quite some time, and I struggle with people that in places in Canada where I'm from, about their first world problems, and I'm thinking, oh my God, like, you really don't know what problems are. I mean, I know 2 wars, and these wars have affected their families in sometimes in horrendous ways. So I really question people's motivation for deciding they've had a bad day. I struggle with it. I really do. So I kind of remove myself from that. But, and one of the things, I think Brené Brown, and I'm going to read it here. She says, when we acknowledge our own hurt and pain, we tend to not diminish the hurt and pain of others. So you can relate. There's some empathy there. And I think by doing that, I think you can serve society in a positive role, even in the circle of friends that you have, by being a little more empathic with the people that are around you, because we're all going through something. We're all doing it. We're all doing it.
And I think you hit on something really that I resonate with, that when we're tough on ourselves, when we're hard on ourselves, when we're mean on ourselves, and we can't forgive ourselves, we can't respond in that way to others either. We'll be just as mean and just as hard and just as tough and just as unkind to others, because we put that standard on ourselves. So how can we have to start with that self-love, which you so rightly said. That's my belief too.
So right. I mean, you have to you have to forgive yourself. Don't be so hard. I mean, other people can be hard on you. So why do you have to start? Cut yourself some slack. And, you, by having that self-love, you
Mm.
are actually, as you just said, you're now in a situation where you can extend that to somebody else. So I think when the biggest gift that you can give to yourself is to forgive somebody else. And when people carry around grudges, you're the only one that does it. The other person's living their life. They don't care. They're going on doing their thing. You're the only one that's harboring that. So let it go. And it's not that big of a deal anymore. Seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's very heavy to carry that around, isn't it? It weighs so much. It
Yeah.
impacts so much on our lives. So,
On top of everything else. And again, it's a choice. Like it's a choice. Like how much do you want to carry? We should be shedding this stuff, and because it doesn't serve us any purpose.
exactly.
Yeah.
I sometimes do an exercise with clients, and I'll give them a glass of water, and I say, "How much do you think that glass weighs? What does it weigh?" And then kind
Yeah.
of try and figure it out. That what it weighs in actual, measurement. And
Yeah.
and then I say, no, actually, the longer you hold it, the heavier it gets.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
that's it. When you carry that weight around with you, it
It's
really
interesting.
does.
You made me think of a story. A friend of mine whose husband was neurologically sick, and it was a huge emotional burden on her. And a number of times, she was reaching a breaking point, and she went over to her sister's one day, and she said she did just what you did, hold up a glass of water. Says, "Is the glass half empty or is it half full?"
Yeah.
And she just wasn't ready to hear this. Like, don't do this to me right now. And says, no, no, no. She said, what you're not seeing is the hand that's holding the glass. And she said, that's what you're doing for your husband. You're supporting him in that way. It's got nothing to do with the glass and the water in it. You're missing the hand holding up the glass. And when she told me that story, it kind of blew me away because it was an interesting analogy. And some people, and again, this whole self-awareness thing is about, we miss so much around us every day because we don't have our eyes open. We're too much on automatic. And there's just so much good stuff out there that we're missing and we don't even realize it.
Yeah, and that's all down to self-awareness and the mindfulness and living in the moment, because too many people are complaining about what they haven't got or what tomorrow might bring. And you just have to listen to the radio. I listen to the radio in the
Oh,
mornings, and
yeah.
I get that, oh, we can't, we're over the hump day, we're halfway through the week. What about the weekend?
Yeah.
You think,
Yeah.
no, what about today? Today is precious. It's called the present. It's a gift.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember one story where the radio announcer came on. I don't know, it was like the third day of rain or whatever it was. And, there's probably, thousands of people listening to his radio broadcast, and just the misery coming out of his voice and across the airwaves was making everybody else miserable because, oh my God, the third day of rain, like, here we go. And all of a sudden people are walking out in a bad mood with their coffee because this guy's attitude coming across on the radio, when in fact, rain is a beautiful thing. It's a source of all life and it's what we need. We can't live without it. And it's just an interesting take on how people, just like you said, like, just fall too much and they want to grasp onto that the negative side of things, and that's more powerful than positive. So that's why we
Yeah.
have to work much harder at being more positive.
Yeah, I think there's something about the rain being on the exterior and the rain being on the interior.
Yeah, yeah. If you wanna cry, go outside and cry in the rain. Nobody knows the difference.
It's true. Very
Yeah,
true.
nobody
Yeah,
knows the
I like
difference.
that.
Yeah, yeah,
So I see that you've trained as a master life coach, emotional intelligence and mindfulness facilitator.
yeah. I did
When did
all
you
of that.
start? When did you start that?
Oh my gosh, that was 2.5 years ago. And it was a big eye-opening. Yeah, it was a big eye-opening experience for me, and it just made me realize. It took me off a tangent actually, and in the sense that I've got, my God, I got about seven books I need to read here. And it's all around emotional intelligence and mindfulness and other people's stories about love and relationships. And there's just, like I said, so much information out there. I'll never get to all of it. And it's a shame there's only 24 hours in a day. But going through that, it really made me look at how we function in a different way, and made me understand how I function, and made me understand what I could and I couldn't change. So that was a huge sort of educational and learning process for me.
Yeah. So who do you coach?
Sorry?
Who do you work with? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, mostly like friends of mine that struggle with their own relationships. And there's a recent friend of mine who basically pulled up stakes and left Canada, moved to Costa Rica, and which was interesting because she sent me a text the other day, and we connected, and something along the lines. She met somebody down there, and she's kind of moved in. She's been like on her own for a while, and now she's anxious and she's panicky. And I asked her, I said, why are you panicking? She said, well, I've been on my own for so long, but this is a huge change for me. And I said, yes, but change and not being out of your comfort zone is a good thing. If you're not changing, if you're not living out of your comfort zone, if things aren't uncomfortable now and then, you're not growing. And she says, oh my God, I never thought of it that way. And I said, no. And so again, we get into our own little worlds, and we succumb to it, we suffocate, and until somebody comes out. I think that's where coaching comes in quite a bit, where somebody come in and can actually, we all have our answers already inside of us, and somebody just needs to give people the space to see it and to vocalize it for themselves. I can't tell a person what to do. You lead them down the path of that aha moment, but even when they have that aha moment, they still have to take action and do something about it. So it actually is really quite interesting.
Yeah. So do you work with people, particular people, doing men or women, or is it just anyone who wants to talk to you about relationships, or is it about self-awareness?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like really anyone, in the sense that men have a different sort of set of issues sometimes to deal with. What's interesting also is, again, men being a mystery for women, vice versa. They really do want to know how men tick, or why there seems to be this kind of, I mean, in relationships, you can have perpetual arguments. I mean, things that you're never, ever going to fix, and sometimes it's better just to acknowledge that you will have them, and you just kind of move on from it. But what a lot of people, I think what a lot of relationships don't understand is that there's a huge communication issue, number one with yourself, number one, two, with the other person, that can resolve a lot of things if you do it quite honestly and openly. And that's where men, I think, struggle, in the sense that, God, if I go there and if I'm really, really honest, she'll think I'm not the man that she married, type thing. And, and it's a fear. And they say, I think, again, Brené Brown, I think, said vulnerability is where fear and courage meet. So it's an interesting dynamic, and then couples go through it all over the world, and it's a struggle. It really is.
Definitely. Yeah, it's that fear. It's that shame, isn't it? What if I don't live up to whatever, and the sense of shame that I'm not going to be what the other person expected me to be, or what I should be, or all those other things that we tell ourselves.
Yeah, but that's us telling. Yeah, exactly. You hit on the point. That's us telling us those things.
Yeah.
And yet, if you sit down and have that honest conversation, the other person might say, "Oh my God, like I never really expected that from you. Like I'm so glad you opened up." And that, there's a huge wave of relief. Number one, because there's always a fear. I mean, there's always a fear of rejection in some way, shape, or form. We all struggle with it. We don't like that. That's painful. We want to avoid pain, but when there's a high, you talk about risk management, there's a higher likelihood of that person, because you're in that relationship, coming to you and say, oh my God, like, why didn't you come to me earlier? It's it's kind of like when you're having an argument and one person says, I'm really, really sorry. Where do you go with that? Like, seriously, it just dissolves everything. All that. And then it's a big argument about, no, it was my fault. No, it was my fault. No, it was my fault. Like, and then like, it just dissolves everything because people get into this back and forth where they want to dominate. And sometimes if one person reaches out and says, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm sorry. And it just dissolves. And we've all been there.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. And so your book is called The Price of Heartbreak. Where can people get hold of your book, Rick?
It's on Amazon.com and .co.uk. So it's available, I think, in ebooks and in hardcover, softcover. And that's an easy find. Google, Amazon's taken over the world. So anything you need on Amazon, you just go there.
Absolutely. Just wanted to check so that people can find it. And I'm really looking forward to reading it because I think it'll be a fascinating book. And your story, which is really powerful and part of the healing process, isn't it?
Totally. And I think somebody asked me once, I loved your book. Great book. How many copies are you going to sell? And I said, well, I don't really care because it did what it did for me. And if it does something for one or two other people, that's great. It's done. It's a done deal for me. But some of the feedback I've got is it's been more than a couple of people that has done some positive things for, but it was never about that. It really wasn't. And it really served me. And just the fact that there was some hope that it would serve other people, and I'll never know about that, and that's okay. And that's where I was with it, and that's where I still am with it. And if the second, I'm actually working on a second one, and this is more about just telling other people's stories about where they were, how bad it was, what was it that made them realize that things need to change, and what did they do to change it. So that'll be a collection of kind of short stories, and people can when it comes out, people will be able to read that and take any number of different ways, because we're all different of getting through various traumatic situations, whatever the case may be. But it'll be other people's stories, because I think those stories are very, very important. And one of the things that I realized is you hear a lot of stories on podcasts, on TV, on radio, and all these amazing stories of people that have gone through so much, and they are very stimulating and motivational. But what about the guy next door? I mean, that doesn't diminish his story any less than the people that are getting all the airplay, so to speak. And I think those stories are important too. I mean, they're important to them, and they shouldn't take a back seat to some of these bigger stories, because that's their life and that's important. So you'd be surprised when people actually start sharing their stories, how amazing people are, and those are the people that are living right next door to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, we've covered such a lot today. It's been fascinating talking to you today. I think we could talk again. I think we should do another one at some point.
Yeah, fantastic.
I don't think we've covered half of what we've only just started opening up onto this subject. So I think it's really good. And I love the fact of talking to men, because I don't think they get their voices heard enough. And so that it's really...
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, sort of the whole thing around, depression and men making up 75% of people that take their life from suicide, and they don't have a voice. They feel they do, but they're suppressing it. And I think that I read someplace something about a movement called Break the Silence, and that's so important, because sometimes, even though you see somebody's behavior change, you're not intruding by going up to somebody and say, "Hey, are you okay?" That may be the click, the trigger that allows them to pour out their heart and move forward and find help in some way, shape, or form. But talking about it is help. So I think that's really, really important, and it's a message that needs to be out there.
Certainly. Yeah. It's been really great talking to you today.
Thank you.
So how can people get in touch with you? I mean, I will put all the details in the show notes.
Sure. Yeah.
But equally, if someone's just listening and they haven't got it in front of them, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way is the website. It's rick-sharpe.com. And we're still building that as we go along, but there's some information there about me, about magazine articles that I've written. There's a link for the book itself and various podcasts, and that's still we're still building that up.
Brilliant. So it's rick-sharpe.com.
Yeah. Because somebody stole Rick Dot, and then Rick Sharpe with no dot, no dash. Somebody stole that too. So that was pretty much what I was left with. So it works. It works in the end.
Oh, that's all that matters, really, isn't it? As long as it works for you and people can get in touch with you, that's all that matters.
Exactly.
So,
that's
it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and thank you for sharing your story. And I hope the listeners have enjoyed this as much as I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, for having me. And again, it's thanks for entertaining all these different people that you have on your podcast, because I think there's a lot of different messages that you bring to everybody, and I think they're all important. So, like I said, keep up the good work. Fantastic.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I really hope you enjoyed the podcast today, and you can always listen to others by clicking on my website, www.yourrelationshipspecialist.co.uk, and finding the podcast on there. You can also learn much more about me and get in touch or sign up for my newsletter. So until next time, bye for now.